Welcome to the Be Ruthless Show, where we have the conversations that other people don't, the conversations that other people won't. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and I'm ready to make a lot of noise and disrupt things, ruthlessly. Thanks for being here today. Now let's get to it. Welcome back to the Be Ruthless Show. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and joining me today is Brooke Carlock from the scenic countryside of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, author, speaker, and educator. Brooke brings a refreshingly pragmatic and humorous approach to the often somber world of grief support. Her debut book, Grief Sucks, But Your Life Doesn't Have to, is far from a conventional self-help book. It's an unfiltered guide through grief, faced with the kind of candid realism only someone who's faced staggering personal loss can deliver. Beyond the written word, Brooke is a certified grief educator, the host of the morning podcast, and the face behind the YouTube channel Grief Sucks with Brooke Carlock. You can find her at brookecarlock.org. I have been so looking forward to this. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
We've both been having one of those days, but your story, this book, you approach it in an amazing way, but it's one that needs to get out there.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate it. It has been a labor of love, but I'm glad that it's finally out there.
I mean, you're doing it all. You did the Audible, how you did it without falling apart. All of this is real stuff, but you're doing it with a smile.
Yeah. I am. You know what? I think with this is totally random, but I'm an 8th grade English teacher and I read books out loud all the time. And I think that's what helped me get through the audiobook is I'm just so used to reading out loud that it wasn't too bad.
Well, tell those who don't know you.
Okay.
Tell those who don't know you your story. I do. I know.
Right. But yes, you know the story. So, all right, my story. I'm one of those people that just life just pelted me with lemons in a very short amount of time. So, I wasn't a stranger to grief. I lost all my grandparents. My sister died when I was in my 20s. And my cousin died of cancer. My sister-in-law died. And so I'd experienced a pretty big amount of grief by the time I was in my 20s and early 30s. And then the 40s just kicked my butt in a span of a year and a half. November 2021, my dad died of a heart attack unexpectedly on his way home from work. On the day of my dad's funeral, my stepmom overdosed on pills and alcohol and she died. And then my mom found out that she had pancreatic cancer. And then the worst thing happened, which was my beautiful 10-year-old daughter, Libby, died in a car accident. My 18-year-old son, Max, was driving the car. And that just I was already reeling from my parents, and that just completely turned my world upside down. While I was grieving for Libby, my mom was going through all of her cancer treatments, and then she ended up passing away. So yeah, in a span of a year and a half, I lost my dad, my mom, my stepmom, and my daughter. So.
And are writing about it with a smile, using it to help others. It's hard to get there at any point, but you're doing it, there's no timeline, but some would say I was on my butt for a long time. You are doing it.
Well, thank you. And I'm not always like this. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. I'm good at turning it off and on. So I say that a lot, like on my YouTube channel, when people see me smiling and laughing and teaching them things and whatever, like I don't really hit record when I'm crying on my sofa, but there are definitely those moments. So I try to keep it real about that as well. But yeah, I think there are a couple things to it. I always tell people I am a huge nerd. I've always been a huge nerd. I love studying. I've always loved school. And so after I lost Libby, I just sort of dove into researching grief. And that was, I say like other people might drink a bottle of wine. I like drowned myself in self-help and just learned everything I could about grief. And then from there, as time went on, I started getting more serious about it and did like the grief educator certification and studied with other, grief book authors and things like that. Took more courses just to become more serious about it. Because at that point I'm just going to ramble. And if there's anything you want to ask, just stop me. But so it kind of started with a blog. That was how I started out. I've been a freelance writer, like my pretty much my adult life. And I've always loved writing. And that was my way of dealing with things when I lost Libby, mostly because I am very introverted and I hate talking on the phone and I can be super awkward in person. So, when you lose someone or you go through something like that, you have people constantly calling you and checking on you and asking you how you are. And I hated having those conversations. So I started writing a blog as a place to direct people. Like instead of having to have those conversations, I was like, here, I write about it on a blog and I tell you everything I'm going through. So go read that. And which was helpful and people did. But then I found that, people that weren't my family and my friends started finding the blog and then they started commenting that it was really helping them. And from there, it just sort of snowballed. It started out as a way for me to process and to learn. And then it turned into, this really seems to be helping people. And that makes you feel good. It feels like you have a purpose. And then it was one of those like, well, I've had all this crap happen to me. Why not do something with it? Like, I could just lay on my sofa all day and feel sorry for myself, but I'd rather help someone. That's what my daughter would have wanted. She was amazing. She was one of the most helpful kids on the planet, just like a ray of sunshine. And so that I was motivated by those comments from people saying that I was helping. Yeah. So the blog turned into the YouTube channel.
Like Live Like Libby.
Yes, Live Like Libby.
I can
talk about that.
Let's talk about her. She does sound like the light that entered lit up the room for everyone.
She was incredible. And every parent says that their kid is the most amazing kid ever. She was the most amazing kid ever. Everyone I ever talked to is just like, you have no idea how lucky you are. She was just, like I said, just a ray of freaking sunshine. She was funny. She was smart. She was beautiful. She was the kid. My favorite thing about her is she was the kid who would be nice to the kids who didn't have friends. She was the person who would sit with someone in the cafeteria if they didn't have someone to sit with. She was the one that, her dance teachers would make her a buddy to a new kid so that the new kid didn't feel alone. That's just who she was. She didn't want anyone to feel left out. She rooted for the underdogs. And I just adore that about her. She was just so good. And it was so unfair to lose her. Her biggest passion was dance. From the time she was little, she just sort of had this unnatural ability to feel the music and was just insanely flexible and just such a beautiful dancer and was on a competition team. And that was her life. She was at the dance studio 6 days a week and was competitive and did really well. And when she died, it didn't take us very long to figure out that we wanted to do something with dance in her honor, because as parents, her dad and I, my ex-husband, David, we knew how hard it was. I mean, dance is expensive. If you're competing and paying for the competitions and the lessons and the costumes, it adds up. And there were times that we were grinding our teeth trying to figure out how to make ends meet because of those hefty payments. And we just didn't want to, we wanted to help anyone who was in that situation. So Live Like Libby, we raise money to provide scholarships to dancers who are in financial need. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's over $20,000 so far that we have in 2 years that we've been able to give to dancers to help them pay for their dance lessons and costumes and competitions. And every time we write a check, it just makes me feel so good. It's the best way to honor her that I can think of. So yeah, she was absolutely incredible.
And we can get to, I don't know Max well yet. I'm getting to know him. Some would think that he could be a complete mess right now and angry at the world, or, going down who knows what paths.
Yeah.
And he is also a bright light who has found a way to make sure that his parents are not falling apart.
Yeah.
And has immediately taken you both, you guys made sure he was working on his mental health, but he is also not blaming himself. Let's talk about this was not his fault. And you've done a ton of work in the area that this accident took place.
Yeah, technically it was his fault, which was a lot to deal with. So he was driving the car, and what happened was he had picked Libby up at dance. They were driving to their dad's house, which they had driven a million times before, and his check engine light came on. He had a problem with his car, and he had called his dad to say, what should I do? Should I pull over? Should I keep going? And his dad had told him to pull over at a farmer's market that was coming up. And we don't know. We think that he was still on the phone with his dad when the accident happened. So we learned from the dash cams and stuff from the police officers that he rolled through that stop sign, not going quickly. He didn't blow through it, but the intersection is also notorious. There have been a ton of accidents there. It's a really bad intersection. There's a auto auction, so car carrier trucks just fly down that road, and it's at a location where it's pretty difficult to see. If you look down the one direction, there's a little bit of a hill, so it's kind of hard to see people coming. So we think he was probably just distracted and worried about his car and rolled through the stop, or thought he could get through, and the truck couldn't slow down in time, and it hit Libby's side of the car. We immediately, before we even knew what happened, we started telling him from the get-go that it wasn't his fault. It was an accident. And it truly was. Some parents, and I think we were lucky in that some parents, if they would have known, their 18-year-old was driving, they would have it in the back of their minds, did they do something wrong? A lot of 18-year-olds aren't responsible. Max was not like that. He is freakishly responsible. So he's the kind of kid that took care of his car and made sure there was enough gas and made sure his oil was changed, and was very meticulous when it came to that kind of stuff. And we used to make fun of him for driving like a grandma. We had no reservations about having Libby ride with him. And so we knew that it was something that could have happened to anybody. It could have been any one of us that happened to. And I think we did a really good job. And I think he would agree. We did a good job of immediately saying, we don't blame you. It's not your fault. We love you. We're glad that you're okay. Could have happened to anybody. And I think he really took that to heart. I do really think he says that sometimes he gets pangs, of guilt, but for the most part, between us, and then he ended up seeing the police recommended a trauma therapist that he went to right away, and she was awesome. They got along really well, and I think that really helped as well. So he's a big proponent of getting therapy if you need it. And so yeah, he's amazingly doing really, really well, despite it could have been a very dark path, and he has pulled through it ridiculously well. So
And you guys openly deal with it. There are families that grief is a subject that the world tiptoes around.
Yep, absolutely.
So, and you know, there are families that don't, especially when it's parent child. He's worrying about your feelings, you're worrying about his. I have
Yep.
so many families I work with where that is 100% all we talk about is how do I talk about this with my parents?
Yeah.
How do I talk about this with my children? Because we know it's there. People can pick up on the energy of somebody else's,
Right.
you know, I'm not telling you something. So that did not happen. Not at all. You guys, and it's divorce. So you
Yeah.
did it together.
Yeah, that is kind of the weird thing. So yeah, Libby's dad and I are divorced, and I was actually married to my second husband at the time that the accident happened, and that relationship had been on a downward spiral. And after Libby died, it ended very quickly. Um, and so yeah, my ex-husband and I have dealt really well, even though we're divorced. Like he's, I've got the morning coffee podcast, and a lot of time he co-hosts with me, and people find that funny that it's like my ex-husband and we're like hanging out. But honestly, like when something that traumatic happens, I tell people he's like the only person that really understands what I'm going through. Like other people say they understand, but other people weren't Libby's parents, unless it's your child. Like, so we have that bond, that shared experience. And I think we did a really good job. And honestly, it's because I was such a nerd and because I was reading like what are good things to do, what are bad things to do, that yeah, we did a good job of getting it out in the open, of talking about things, and it definitely wasn't perfect. We did a really good job talking about Libby and keeping her memory alive and doing things to honor her all the time. And we never wanted to make it where we talked about Libby in a hushed way. We did. I think we did a very good job from the get-go of telling stories about funny stuff that she did, just remembering her constantly. And I love that. I think that really helped. But we didn't really hide when we were upset either. I mean, the kids saw me crying. They saw my ex-husband crying. We always let them know that they could talk to us about anything. At the time, Max was 18 and our middle son, Grayson, was 16. And they're teenage boys. It's not like, well, of course we worried because we were like, should they be crying more? Should they be talking to us more? And we had to learn that, teenagers internalize a lot more than we want to. We actually found out, and I kind of share with a lot of people that have teens that have gone through loss, that instead of talking to you, a lot of times they're talking to their friends. So if you feel like they're not talking about it, they just might be talking to their friend group because the friend group is so important at that age. So that's what we found out with our middle son. We didn't think he was dealing with his feelings at all, but then we found out that he talked to his friends about it a lot. So that made us feel a little bit better. But yeah, I think we're doing for everything we've gone through. I feel like we're doing the best we can.
I think this is important because so many people try to hide the crying from the kids.
Yeah.
And then there are the kids who are trying to protect the parents. So I want to stay on this
Sure.
because we know when you're not okay. We don't have to share everything. There are some things that maybe are too adult, but it is okay to let your kids know this, I'm not okay. Look at what just happened. How could you be okay?
Yeah. And I tried at first to kind of keep it from the boys because I didn't want them to see me completely breaking down because I thought that it would hurt them. But it was actually Max who told me, like, stop trying to hide it. Like you just lost your daughter. We know you're going to cry. And he was like my boys were more worried about me. I think like they were worried about us. and how we were doing, and they wanted to be a comfort to us. Like Max will say, you know, he's like, I don't know how you did it. Like, I can't imagine losing, you know, my child. And especially with us, it was a little, I think it did have something to do with how well they're doing. There was a big age gap between them. So there was 8 years between Max and Libby. And so, you know, the boys were teenagers and Libby was still in elementary school. So they weren't the kind of siblings, like they would hang out together, you know, and we'd do family stuff together and whatever and go on hikes, but they weren't like hanging out, you know? So like my boys are much closer than either of them were with Libby, just because they're only 2 years apart. It was just that natural kind of age group. And she was so busy with dance and doing her own thing that it was almost like they knew for me because she was my girl, you know. we did so many things together. I nicknamed her my barnacle because she was always attached to my hip, which I loved. Like, we did everything. She helped me cook and bake, and you know, I loved all the dance stuff and going to the competitions and just talking to her about everything. And so she and I were super duper close, and the boys saw that and they knew that. So they were worried because they knew how attached, you know, I was to Libby and how much a part of my life she was. So they were worried about me. So yeah, I think it is really important to just be real. And that's what I've discovered in this whole grief journey. And I think that's what people really respond to with the things that I do in the grief world and with the book. I'm brutally honest about what grief is like. And I find that people want that. They respond to just keeping it real and being honest about the terrible things and the good things. So,
Yeah. And kids just know if we don't want them to be dishonest with us.
Yeah.
They deserve the same. And they can just tell. They're smart little sponges soaking it all up. So it's harder work. You're already grieving and in pain. Trying to hide it is just another job.
Yep. It is. It's funny to think about it now because we, like, right after Libby died, it seems so bizarre to look back on it now, but because no one was working, Max was injured. I didn't talk about that, but I don't know if you want me to talk about that. But so he had a head injury from the accident and was in the hospital and ended up, he doesn't remember anything about the day of the accident. It's all wiped out. And he was actually on, I don't know if I ever told you this, he was on a 30-second delay with memory. And it was the weirdest thing I have ever witnessed, but he couldn't remember anything for more than 30 seconds. So you would tell him something and it was awful. It was god awful. In the hospital the night of the accident, he'd say, what happened? Why am I in the hospital? And we'd tell him what happened. And then 30 seconds later, he would forget. And we'd have to start it all over again and tell him again. And it ended up by, like, after a couple hours of that, it was so bizarre, but Libby had just died and we were laughing because he was going to be okay. We knew he was going to be okay. The doctor said it was temporary, that, you know, his brain was injured. It was going to get back to normal. But we were laughing because we were just like, don't worry. He'd say what happened and we'd be like, don't worry, you're going to forget about it in 30 seconds anyway. And, you know, because it was just the most bizarre thing I have ever experienced. And yeah, it's the things that we did just seem strange, but they really helped at the time. I mean, we all went out to the movies together after he was a little bit better. He had to get a little bit better. But then, you know, we went to the movies together. We went out to eat together. Like, we went out and really just tried to bond as a family, kind of all in a state of shock, not believing what had just happened to us, you know, just trying to process and doing that together. And because we spent so much time together in those first few weeks, it was impossible to hide anything from them. Yeah, of course they knew. Of course they could tell, because in those days the shock happens and then it starts to wear off eventually, and then you lose it, a lot. But yeah, it was
But then you also went to work on this intersection and said, it's not safe here.
right. It hadn't been safe. Like, everybody knew that road is notorious, and it's actually a few different intersections on that road that there have been numerous fatalities. And yeah, we were just angry, like, and we've learned not to be angry. It's really hard not to say, why didn't you do something beforehand? It's hard not to think that way. Like, why couldn't we fix this before my daughter died? But yeah, we went to different meetings, board meetings, with the traffic people and the township. And it's a weird intersection because, like, the township owns one side and then the Department of Transportation runs the other side. So they have to coordinate. And we just got all these excuses of why nothing could be done. And it really honestly took Libby dying, which is unfortunate because there have been multiple accidents there, but it took the cute, friendly, nice 10-year-old girl that everybody loved to die for them to finally say, okay, what can we do about this? So it's sometimes I kind of waver between being a little bitter about that and also knowing that because of who Libby was, she would be happy that other people won't get hurt. So I try to look at it that way. And yeah, the timing was very ironic, but it was actually the day my book was released. They announced that they are going to make improvements at that intersection and make it safer for other people. So yeah, that was very bittersweet, but I'm trying to lean more towards the sweet and know that Libby would be happy that people aren't going to be hurt because of her.
And so many in this world, like, to me, that was her. Like, that's the angels watching over us. That just cannot happen on that day. Coincidentally, there's just, in my world, I just can't look at it that way anymore. And people say to us, oh, you're just saying that to make yourself feel better. And I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. It
was interesting because it actually, just this week, it's been in the news. So the news is now picked up on the fact that they're making those improvements. So just this week, I had a friend at work say, hey, Libby was on the news this morning. And it's been over 2 years since the accident. So I'm like, what? What are you talking about? But here, the local news station did a story about the improvements and used Libby as the main focus of the story about how, this 10-year-old girl, Libby Miller, died at this intersection. And it was one of those mom moments where it's like a perfect analogy for grief being a roller coaster, because you see her face on the news and it's like, you get that mom, like, your heart just breaks. But then it's like, yes, they finally are doing something, and I was happy about that. So yeah, it was a definite moment. But that's how grief is. It's waves of weird feelings. You never know what's going to happen.
And that's what those who haven't dealt with it yet don't understand. Because, like I said, you're doing it with a smile on your face, right? It's invisible. There's this myth that something magical happens at this 1 year mark. And everyone thinks, oh, look, they're doing great. Sam's doing this. Brooke's doing this. Yet I still cry daily. Right? Not sobbing on the floor. I can stand up, but that's what you don't know until you live it. And we don't want you to live it and be in the pain, but it doesn't go away.
Yeah. No, definitely does not. And I say to people, like, I'm no one special. Like, you don't know how you're going to react until something like that happens to you. You have no clue. So that's why it drives me nuts when people say things like, I don't know how you're so strong. Like, I could never do what you're doing. And I'm like, you have no idea. I used to, you know, if somebody would have said to me, like, my daughter was going to die, I would be like, I would never survive. I would not be able to function. She, she was my world. But here I am, like, you don't know how you're going to react until it actually happens to you. Actually, one of my favorite sections of my book is talking about functioning versus grieving, because I think so many people equate with functioning with like, oh, you must be doing well because you're functioning. You must not be sad because here you are on a podcast, here you are writing a book and whatever. That has nothing to do with it. There are people who can put on the fake face and function and then completely melt down. Like, it does not mean that you're not feeling your grief. Just like people who are laying on the sofa that can't get up and can't do daily activities, that doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to function. Everyone is different, and how they handle things is different. So it's really, grief is not about looking at someone else and saying they're doing it better or they're doing it correctly. It's all how you handle it, and you don't know how you're going to handle it until it happens.
And you have no choice.
No,
right?
Yeah.
You had two other boys, like you clearly had to.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Like, did we want to? Not so much.
Exactly. I had mortgage payments. I had kids in school. Like, I couldn't just shut down and not do anything. And I think for me, teaching was part of that, because with teaching, it doesn't matter what you're feeling. You have to get up in front of a room full of kids every day, and you could be having the worst day of your life, but you can't sob in front of a, room of 38th graders. You just don't do that. So, over the years, I think being a teacher, it's almost like being an actor. So, I've built up the ability to seem like I'm okay, but it doesn't mean that I'm not feeling things underneath. But I'm also good at processing. Like, that's so important, is even if you're good at functioning, and I'm sure it's this way for you, like, we could be high functioning and doing all these things, but we also know how important it is to let yourself feel those feelings and not ignore them. So I had to learn that. I tried to work and work and work and work and study my way through my grief, and that catches up to you really quickly. So
have your students seen your book?
They have, and they are very excited, although it makes me a little nervous, because some of them are like, oh, my mom bought your book, and it is not PG. There are a lot of swear words in my book. So I'm just like, okay, tell your parents that I don't swear in class. that is not teacher, Ms. Carlock. That is when she's at home, Ms. Carlock. But they're 8th graders, so they've heard it all. But it's just always that, oh, I hope they like it. But yeah, they're excited. They kind of went through the process with me this year of, getting everything out there and turning it all in and going through the editing and the publishing. And that was fun.
And that's the perfect age. They're old enough to have these conversations.
Yes. Yeah, they get it. I have quite a few of my students that like watch my YouTube channel, and then they'll discuss a topic with me, because by this age, in this day and age, 13-year-olds, they've had some stuff happen. I mean, we've had kids in our district that have passed away. Libby's friends are in my middle school now. That's her class that's there. So there are a lot of her friends. It makes it very, I have a love-hate relationship with that. I love them to death, but man, is it hard to see all of them every day. But yeah, So they definitely have been through their own grief, which a lot of times we don't think about, but they are finding
I
things helpful.
find my experience has been the schools by you are pretty supportive. So what's allowed if they need to sit and talk?
Um, in my school, like when Libby died, they did a great job of providing support to the kids. They had people come in and talk about it. They did a lot of stuff to honor her that I didn't even know was happening. We actually got the name Live Like Libby because her elementary school did a chalk message day. So like right after she died, the whole school went out and they all wrote how they were feeling and wrote things about Libby in chalk. And then we went to go see it and we kept seeing Live Like Libby written in chalk. And we just saw it and was like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Like that, it perfectly described. If everyone could live like Libby, the world would be an amazing place to be. Like we knew exactly what it meant just from looking at it. And it was the most beautiful thing. So yeah, they've done a really good job. I wouldn't say there is enough done just with grief in general. In most schools, I don't know any schools in my area that are really discussing grief, openly. But I do have people that come to me, during the day. I have students that know what I do and they'll, email me or come and talk to me during the day about grief stuff. And I'm happy to help them if I can. But yeah.
So we'll be changing that in December. We'll be hoping that your school and
Oh,
other schools
yes.
will be sharing another book that you're a part of, and your
Yeah.
son graciously shared his story, which is how I'm getting to know him
Yes.
in Faces of Grief. And
Mhm.
so hopefully schools will allow this to be educational, everything we're talking about, that
Yeah.
they know somebody, they've dealt with grief in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or form, and how can we make this educational and talk about it and make it comfortable
Right.
so that it's not so taboo and avoided. They're
Yeah.
living it. This
Well,
is real.
everyone thinks if you don't like the biggest misconception is if I bring it up, it's going to upset the person. And it's the exact opposite. Like, I want people to talk to me about Libby. I want you to tell me that story. I want her friends to talk about her and remember her. And our society has such a feeling of like, oh, I don't want to bring it up because what if they cry or what if they what if they get upset? It's pretty much the opposite for most grieving people that I know. We want to know that our person isn't forgotten. We want to be able to discuss the feelings that we're having. So I think the more that we do that, and with the things that we're doing, you and I hopefully, hopefully we're making a change in the way people react to grief and how they deal with it. Trying to get it out
So
there.
if people do Live Like Libby, they will find a way and they can donate. My niece is a gymnast, but I'm sure there are dancers in her world. So all they have to do is
Yeah.
Live Like Libby.
It's livelikelibby.org. And if you go there, you can donate. We have merchandise. Yeah, you can see videos of Libby dancing and see pictures of her and learn her incredible story. And yeah, everything that you purchase or donate all goes to help dancers take more classes. And Libby wanted everyone to dance. So we're just trying to help people do that.
And so should people go to brookecarlock.org or Amazon to get the book?
Oh, either one. If you go to brookecarlock.org, if you're trying to find me anywhere, brookecarlock.org will have links to everything. So I have the podcast every other Sunday at 11 called Morning Coffee, where we discuss grief topics. And a lot of times Libby's dad, David, and I are co-hosts for that and kind of talk about our grief experiences. And then my YouTube channel is Grief Sucks with Brooke Carlock. So there's a link on brookecarlock.org, or you can just go to YouTube and search Brooke Carlock or Grief Sucks. You'll find me either way. And then the book you can get pretty much anywhere you can buy online books. So Amazon, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, any online bookstore will have copies of that as well.
Are we forgetting anything?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I really appreciate you giving me time to come on here, and
yeah, and stay and follow me, us. You'll see Faces of Grief. So we'll be talking about Grief Sucks, and then the next book that comes out, so you can follow Brooke all year. BrookeCarlock.org, liveLikeLibby.org.
And the books are totally different, which is what I like. So in Faces of Grief, I just contribute a chapter more of my story, but in Grief Sucks, But Your Life Doesn't Have to, it's my story mixed in with, it's basically just me compiling everything that helped me on my grief journey and kind of putting it in one place. So that's why I say I'm not like reinventing the wheel. It's just putting things in a nice, simple order. I don't know about you, but like when I was going through the early days of grief, I just was looking everywhere. Like, someone just tell me what to do. Like, just tell me how to survive. So I kind of wrote this with that in mind of what I was looking for at that time. So hopefully people will find that helpful.
So helpful. And I think what's interesting is that everyone has different things that we decline in when grief, like research for me, reading, that was just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that would have been so difficult. So having a book with everything in one place.
Really that's what I say. I was like, I was a nerd, so you don't have to be. And it is written for people who have grief brain, who don't feel like reading. It is short, easy to read chapters, ridiculously honest, raw, down to earth, like what it's really like. So exactly, for people who are not going to dive into all the courses and books and things like that.
And they're swearing because when you reach that point, that's how, those words come out. You get past it, but you really do say those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a mix. I mean, definitely swear words, but I think the best comments that I get are the people that tell me, like, I laughed on one page and cried on the next. Like, I was reading through it and I was both crying, I was sobbing, and I was laughing. And I love that, because that's how grief is for me anyway. Like, you can be hysterically sobbing 1 minute and then remember a funny memory, and then you're, laughing about it with your family. And I wanted to reflect that. I just wanted to keep it real and honest.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Look for Brooke at BrookeCarlock.org or liveLikeLibby.org. And until next time, always be ruthless.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Your support means everything to me, truly. If this podcast resonates with you, please do me a favor and join in the Ruthless movement by making some noise and doing one of these 4 things. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Tell a friend so we can break stigmas even faster. Leave a review so people can see what you think of the show. And last, if you want to learn more about me and be a part of the Grief Hab community, please head on over to the Facebook group. We'd love to have you. Thanks again for spending your time with us, and see you next week.